The evacuation was falling apart. Radios jammed. Visibility dropped. The lead pilot circled twice, then called off the landing. Everyone backed away from the screen. Ground crews whispered about fuel limits and fallback zones. No one asked the woman in logistics, standing off to the side with a folded terrain map and dirt on her sleeves. She didn't speak. She just walked to the console, keyed in a new corridor, and rerouted the call sign through an old repeater station. 30 seconds later, the flight resumed course. When they touched down, no one cheered, but they landed, because she saw it. Callie's alarm never needed to ring at 500 hours. Her body knew the rhythm by now. While the rest of the base turned in their bunks or pulled on flight suits with half-laced boots, she was already out on the line, boots biting into frost-covered concrete, clipboard tucked under one arm, and flight gloves looped through her belt. The wind came in sharp from the north ridge, slipping down the mountain slopes and curling between the tail booms of the parked helicopters. It swept dust and loose grit across the pads, whispering through the lattice of tie-down chains, like an old voice repeating orders no one heard anymore. The Black Hawk she checked wasn't even her bird. It belonged to lead pilot Sam, who wouldn't show up for at least 20 more minutes. Callie moved through the pre-flight checklist anyway, fingers steady on each latch and lever, eyes scanning for hairline cracks and seams. Fluid streaks. Anything out of tolerance. She wiped the canopy glass until it reflected the sky. She ran diagnostics on the communications array, tested the radios 3 times, and verified fuel levels with a dipstick even though the gauge read full. She didn't do this out of boredom or ambition. She did it because someone might need that helicopter ready 1 minute earlier than expected, and if that ever happened, she didn't want hesitation to be the reason someone didn't make it back. Behind her, boots clapped the pavement. Sam's voice followed a half-beat later, casual and unhurried. You trying to wear the paint off that bird? Callie, relax. She's just going for a milk run today. Try not to break anything while you're babysitting her. He didn't wait for a response. He pulled his gloves from his vest and tossed them across the co-pilot seat before disappearing into the ready tent, still zipping his flight suit. Callie made a final note on the checklist, closed the clipboard, and placed it on the dash where he wouldn't read it. Inside the operations tent, the morning briefing was already beginning. A low hum of casual confidence filled the room. Maps flickered on digital displays, colored paths crawling across terrain models with calculated precision. Personnel in flight vests leaned over tables, sipping reheated coffee, murmuring about timing windows and hot zones with the ease of people who had run this loop a dozen times before. Vic, the mission commander for the medevac run, stood near the center with his arms crossed, aviator lenses perched on his forehead. He exuded the kind of practiced certainty that didn't invite contradiction. Callie found a spot along the wall and stood silently, holding her notes close to her chest. When Vic reviewed the route to forward base Lima, Callie studied the weather overlays and noticed a pattern that didn't align with the standard forecast. Minor signal interference layered against a temperature band that didn't match the wind shear data. It wasn't dramatic, but it was off. She waited for a pause in the chatter. When it came, she stepped forward and spoke quietly. "Sir, I'm seeing irregular static on the relay bands for that corridor. It could indicate localized jamming, combined with thermal drift in the valley. I'd recommend a modified approach vector." Vic blinked at her, then turned his full body toward the group with exaggerated patience. "You hearing this? Sam backup pilots forecasting ghosts again. Tell me something. Callie, you think deer are running SIGINT now?" A few snickers traveled across the room. Sam didn't look up from his tablet. "She's got a vivid imagination," he said. "Probably saw a weather glitch and wrote a novel about it." Vic smiled and shook his head. "Appreciate the concern, Callie, but I've flown this route 50 times, never lost a screw. Try to relax today. Just observe and learn from the pros." Callie gave a short nod and stepped back. No one else spoke. She tucked the note into her folder and returned to the edge of the room, eyes settling on the moving red line that marked their planned ingress. Her voice stayed quiet, Her eyes did not. The air outside had already warmed a few degrees by the time she returned to the flight line. Fuel vapors hung in the air as the Black Hawk hummed under power. Sam was laughing with one of the medics near the ramp. Callie climbed aboard, clipped in, and stared at the horizon beyond the rotors. Mountains layered the distance, dark against a sky that never promised anything. She reached up and tapped the radio dial once, adjusting the frequency to one she had memorized from an old emergency protocol. No one noticed. Her gloves still hung from her belt. Her hands were steady. At exactly 600 hours, the helicopter lifted off. Callie said nothing, but she had already seen what others missed. She always did. Callie's bunk was the third one from the back wall in the southeast corner of the barracks. It was always made before morning inspection, even though inspections hadn't been held in over a year. The blanket was tucked tight, edges aligned, not because anyone told her to, but because she couldn't imagine starting the day with anything out of place. Above the bed, taped to the wall at shoulder height, was a single photograph. It showed a young man in a tan flight suit, wind ruffling his hair as he smiled beside a Black Hawk with faded rotors. Her brother Ben had one arm slung across her shoulder and the other pointing toward the sky behind them. Callie, 16 in that photo, was trying not to grin. She had failed. Beneath the photo sat a shelf barely deep enough to hold a logbook, a compass, and a folded patch sealed in plastic. The patch bore Ben's old medevac unit insignia. She never unsealed it. Some things needed to stay preserved. Most nights. The base quieted down by 2300 hours. Lights dimmed. The rec room screens flicked off. The hangar emptied. But one building still buzzed low with power. The simulation room tucked behind the training wing. Its hum had become part of Callie's routine, just like the sound of her boots crossing its threshold. She signed herself in after hours, slid on the headset, and loaded programs that were never part of official rotation. She didn't practice smooth missions. She didn't rehearse textbook entries. Her drills were chaos by design. Failed hydraulics over open sea, rotor damage in storm conditions, dead stick landings on a single engine at night with no nav beacons. She built each one manually, drawing terrain overlays from archived missions and mapping threat profiles by hand. Her charts were layered with notes in pencil, color-coded tape, and fold lines worn soft by repetition. Sometimes, she would pause during a recovery drill, fingers hovering over the throttle control, and stare through the simulator's windshield into a projected canyon that didn't exist. She'd take a single breath, the kind Ben used to call her pilot reset, then start again. Not to beat the program, just to make sure that if the moment ever came, she would already know the feel of it. Ben's voice still lived in memory more than recordings. She remembered the night before his final mission more clearly than she remembered what she'd eaten yesterday. They were sitting at their parents' kitchen table, flight manuals spread out between them, coffee mugs near the edge, condensation rings blooming on the wood. Ben had leaned in close, his finger tracing a page of emergency protocols. You don't fly for applause, he'd said, and you don't fly to win. You fly because someone needs you, and you were the one who studied when everyone else went to bed. He tapped the manual once, softly, then added, "The sky doesn't care if you feel ready. It cares if you are." The next morning, he lifted off from a coastal base during a weather scramble to reach a pinned unit. The fog layer was too dense. The descent path wasn't cleared. The call still went through. His Black Hawk went down 3 minutes from the extraction zone. 12 soldiers survived because he diverted power to stabilize the spin. Ben didn't. At the funeral, the chaplain read prepared words and called it heroic. Callie stood beside the casket and didn't say a single thing aloud. She only placed one item on the flag that covered the lid, a folded map from Ben's flight bag with her initials penciled next to his. Side by side, in the lower margin. It wasn't a tribute. It was a promise. Years passed, but the vow held. Each night, after the official drills ended, she walked back into that sim room. She recalibrated pitch alignment, reset yaw stabilizers, and modified torque response protocols until she could recite them in her sleep. She rebuilt every failure Ben's flight log had listed, every possible combination of wind drift and mechanical delay. She studied the noise thresholds of a failing transmission, the flicker rate of an overworked panel. She knew how long it took a Black Hawk to glide without thrust in cold air at 6,000 feet because she had tested it 100 times. She never uploaded her scores, she never spoke about it in briefings, and no one asked. One night, while resetting the trim system during a simulated mountain hover, she reached over to steady the throttle with her left hand. Her right hand rested lightly on the backup gauge panel. The edge of her glove brushed the flight log on the desk beside her. Already open to a dog-eared page. She pressed her finger to the margin, right where her brother's initials had been copied in neat, fading ink, and nodded once. Then she restarted the drill. The flight to forward base Lima was supposed to be straightforward. Weather held steady at 5,000 feet. Visibility clear across the southern ridge. No turbulence reported along the corridor. The wounded soldiers in the rear compartment were sedated and stable. They were quiet. Bodies strapped into the gurneys with clean lines and steady monitors. Still, everyone aboard knew that time mattered. One of them had a punctured lung. Another had internal bleeding the field medics hadn't been able to locate. Every minute in the air before surgical care could mean a different outcome. There was no room for mistakes. Callie sat in the left seat, eyes moving across her portion of the instrument panel, fingers lightly resting near but not on the flight controls. She wasn't flying. Not officially. Vic sat to her right, hands confident on the cyclic, boots planted like he had grown into that cockpit. Sam was behind them, leaned back with his headset half on, monitoring cargo restraints and chatting with the medics about touchdown timing. They all sounded casual, like this was another routine loop they could fly half asleep. But Callie's stomach tightened the moment they crossed the valley line. The radio static came first, not loud or dramatic, just a thin, persistent hiss that faded in and out across channels. Then came the slight pull in the magnetic compass, a drift of barely 2 degrees that realigned itself without explanation. Callie ran diagnostics twice, verified her headset, recalibrated, then leaned toward the side panel to access her second set of weather overlays. The expected temperature was off by nearly 4 degrees at altitude. That discrepancy didn't match atmospheric patterns. She switched to her secondary optics and brought the high-powered binoculars to her eyes. The forest below was dense and unbroken, pines pushed up like clustered needles, branches packed with late-season moisture that dulled the heat signature of most wildlife. But nestled within the tree line, just east of their flight path, she saw 2 shapes, symmetrical, static, too consistent to be animals. Their heat signatures glowed too evenly, held too still. One shape was elevated, barely, like it had been mounted for line of sight. She adjusted focus and checked her bearing. "Vic," she said calmly over the comm, "we may have 2 thermal anomalies at our 2 o'clock, about 1 click southeast. Patterns are consistent with fixed fighting positions, possible anti-aircraft setups, could be concealed battery nests." Vic didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the screen once, then back at the canopy. "This valley's full of mineral junk. Distorts everything. That's probably just metal deposits warming in the sun." Callie didn't move. "Sir, I cross-checked against geological overlays. There are no reflective deposits mapped at that elevation, and the heat pattern is structured non-organic symmetry." Vic exhaled through his nose, then reached up and flicked a toggle on the radio. You backup pilots see conspiracies in tree stumps. I've flown this run more than 50 times. No one's ever fired a shot here. They'd need a ladder and a miracle to mount anything in that thicket." Sam chuckled behind them. "Relax, Callie. If the forest grows legs and grabs us, you get to say I told you so." Callie didn't reply. She logged the coordinates into her unused mission log, circled the thermal shapes with a digital marker, then stored the file in a private subfolder. She didn't push it again, but she kept watching the tree line. Ahead of them, the valley opened into a stretch of uneven terrain, then sloped sharply upward toward the pass that shielded Lima's outer perimeter. The flight path arched gently right to clear a weather pocket that had clung to the cliffside since early morning. It was a familiar curve, one Vic had taken on every delivery in the past 6 months. But Callie's hand stayed close to the controls. In the rear cabin, one of the medics adjusted a strap on the middle patient. The man's arm twitched once, then stilled. His vitals held, green line pulsing slow but stable. Another minute of delay could tilt that balance. Callie knew this. She also knew what a disguised heat signature looked like when masked under a thermal net. She scanned the horizon again. No visible flash, no movement. But her gut had hardened into something dense and unmoving. She didn't have proof, and the authority to reroute was not hers. She looked down at her logbook again, untouched on the clip mount beside her seat. She had seen enough. The first explosion didn't make a sound so much as it carved space out of the air. A ripple of pressure surged through the fuselage, lifting the nose of the helicopter a half-degree off course. The blast roared past their starboard side and detonated just ahead. A stream of white, hot vapor peeling back like a curtain as it missed them by less than 10 feet. Vic swore, yanking the cyclic hard to the left, trying to angle them out of the kill zone. His voice cracked through the radio, calling contact. But the words fractured under static. A second rocket-propelled grenade struck the right engine mount. The detonation blew through the outer housing, sending a shower of metal shards into the cabin. The sound wasn't a bang. It was a punch. Something wet hit the side bulkhead. Sam screamed. The medics went down hard when one of the straps tore loose, dragging a gurney halfway across the deck. Warning lights blanketed the cockpit, amber and red, screaming over each other in chaotic chorus. The smell of burning insulation filled the space, sharp and sour. Vic's mouth opened for a command, but no order came out. His head snapped forward, smashing into the instrument panel as a piece of shrapnel tore across his forehead. Blood splattered across the altimeter. His hands slipped off the controls. The helicopter jerked downward. They were falling. For 3 seconds, Callie didn't move. Her ears rang. Her body froze. The control panel spun like a roulette wheel. In that exact moment, a memory flashed so clearly, it could have been real. Ben, sitting in the old kitchen, tapping a diagram with 2 fingers and saying, "You don't have to be the best. You just have to be ready when someone needs you." Her left hand shot forward. She seized the cyclic, nudged the yaw pedals with her boots, and reached for the collective with her right. The tail rotor was still responding. The main rotor was damaged, but functional. She didn't fight the spin. She used it. She killed power to the engine and initiated auto-rotation. Air rushed through the rotor blades in reverse, slowing their fall just enough to steer. The fuselage groaned in protest. Smoke filled the gaps between panels. Every vibration threatened to shear the cabin apart. But her hands didn't shake. She adjusted the pitch of the blades, managing the descent angle with math she had rehearsed 1,000 times in silence. 200 feet, 150. A patch of trees opened like a slot just below. She flared the nose at 90 feet, dropped collective, then pulled back hard at 60. The Blackhawk hit the clearing in a bone-rattling skid. The left skid snapped. The tail swung wide, but the body held. They were down, alive. Callie unbuckled in a single motion and turned to assess the cabin. The medics were bleeding but mobile. One soldier was unconscious, the other 2 stable. Vic was slumped sideways, pulse faint but present. Sam was wide-eyed and silent, gripping a handle like it could anchor him to reason. Outside, muzzle flashes lit the tree line. 6 silhouettes moved fast and low through the brush. Rifle fire cracked across the clearing, stitching the air with noise. They weren't retreating. They were advancing. Callie dropped to a crouch and reached under the panel. The weapons system had survived the landing. She ran diagnostics on power relays and quickly rerouted fire control to her console. The gun pods responded. The forward array clicked into position. Heat detection picked up movement in 3 arcs. She keyed her headset and spoke calmly. "All units, this is Callie in Medevac 07. We are down in grid Lima Echo 4, under active fire. I have wounded on board. Beginning suppression fire. Request immediate ground support." She didn't wait for acknowledgement. She powered the rotors back up. The clearing exploded with sound as the blades sliced the air. Dust rose in spirals. Her fingers danced over the targeting grid. She laid fire across the southern ridge, then veered west and opened a second burst into the brush, where movement clustered. The first hostile group dove for cover. The second scattered. The helicopter lifted, not high, just enough to hover 6 feet above the treetops. She rotated on axis and circled the clearing in a tight radius, her firing pattern disciplined and precise. From her console, she patched into the ground team channel. Her voice was clipped and surgical. "I have 6 hostiles on foot, bearing east to the rock line, marking positions with infrared. I am providing covering fire. Clear to approach from north." Confirmation came through from the quick reaction force. They were en route, less than 3 minutes out. She continued orbiting the perimeter, laying suppressive fire with clinical accuracy, forcing the ambushers into defensive posture. Her field of fire created a corridor wide enough for the incoming unit to move without contact. When the boots hit the ground, they moved fast. The ground team secured the site, captured all 6 fighters alive, and recovered the crash site without a single additional wound. The wounded soldiers were evacuated onto the secondary bird that arrived minutes later. Callie brought the helicopter back into the clearing for final pickup. Her landing was swift and stable. The rotors slowed, the cabin hissed with settling pressure, and the whole aircraft exhaled around her. She sat at the controls, breathing through the burn in her shoulders, one hand still resting on the collective. Outside, smoke curled around the tree line like steam rising from a sealed moment. The sun was cresting the ridgeline by the time Callie brought the Black Hawk in. The light broke in long, low shafts across the concrete, casting gold against the hangar doors and shimmering off the frost-softened tarmac. Her hands never wavered on the controls. She aligned the final approach by eye alone, compensated for a slight crosswind from the west, and eased the aircraft down so gently that the skids touched the pad within 2 inches of the marked grid. Ground crew later confirmed it against the laser track. Not even a margin of error. The rotors slowed. The fuselage hissed with settling tension. For a moment, the field was silent. Then the doors opened. Vic was conscious now, bruised, bandaged, and quiet. A medic helped him down the ramp. His boots met the ground with hesitation. He turned toward Callie, still seated at the controls, her headset looped around her neck. She was recording final instrument readings, cross-referencing the engine diagnostics with fuel burn totals. The same routine she had done 100 times when no one noticed. Vic stood beside the skids, blinking against the sunlight. He didn't try to make a speech. He didn't smile. "I've flown 15 years, he said, and I've never seen anyone do what you just did." Callie didn't look up. She nodded once, checked a box on her clipboard, and moved to the next line. Word had spread by then. People began stepping out of buildings, crew chiefs, junior techs, operations officers who had heard bits over the emergency channel and wanted to see it with their own eyes. Sam climbed down last, eyes wide, his uniform streaked with dirt and smoke. He didn't speak. He simply moved to the side, joining the others as they watched her complete the shutdown. The helicopter sat gleaming under the soft rise of light, its rotors ticking as they cooled. The same aircraft Callie had been cleaning before dawn now looked like it had returned from another world. An officer from logistics approached her later with a polished case in hand. Inside was a commendation medallion, blue and gold, backed by a certificate bearing her name and an embossed mission record. He began to speak, something about valor and composure under fire. But Callie held up one hand gently and pointed to the aircraft locker mounted on the interior wall. without a word. She placed the medal inside. Next to it, she left a folded note on standard white flight paper. In block handwriting it read, "Don't wait until someone saves you to recognize they were ready." She closed the latch and returned to the post-flight maintenance checks. Her gloves were already back on. Her posture was the same as it had been at 500 hours that morning. People lingered, but no one interrupted. Across the line, the medics who had survived the crash stood beside the aid truck, watching her work in silence. One of them, a younger specialist with a bandaged shoulder, turned to Sam and said something too quiet to hear. Sam didn't answer. He just nodded slowly and kept his eyes on Callie. No music played. No flag was raised. There was no speech from the commanding officer, but the respect in the air was unmistakable. It moved quietly, like a new weather system settling in. Inside the cockpit, Callie ran her final system diagnostic and powered down the last circuit breaker. She adjusted the pilot seat back to neutral, reset the trim, and replaced the checklist in its original slot. The panel lights dimmed. The aircraft was at rest. She stepped onto the pad and walked toward the hangar, her clipboard tucked under one arm, boots echoing against the concrete. People stepped aside as she passed, not out of deference, out of understanding. She had been ready for years. They just hadn't known it until now. By the end of winter, Callie's schedule hadn't changed. She still arrived before dawn. She still walked the flight line with her gloves tucked through her belt, wiping dew from windshields before the sun touched them. She still double-checked every emergency kit. Not because she was asked to, but because she could not imagine doing less. But the difference now was in who watched. The younger pilots didn't pretend not to notice her anymore. They lingered near the hangar doors, pretending to tighten gear or rearrange manuals, their eyes following every step she took during pre-flight. Some started copying her layout for equipment. Others began arriving earlier than the standard call time. One trainee had drawn a copy of her daily checklist by hand, lining it up beside the issued version like a blueprint with better answers. The instructors noticed, too. During simulation briefings, one of them pointed to her flight profile from the crash and described it as a textbook case in controlled descent under hostile pressure. They called it the Callie Standard. No one made that official. But the name stuck. It moved between squadrons quietly, then appeared in email memos, then in debriefing packets for trainees headed into medevac roles. Her motto became part of it, though she never wrote it down. Someone had heard her say it once, almost offhand. There are no backup pilots, only pilots waiting for their moment. It spread like a quiet oath. Instructors began saying it at the end of each training cycle. Trainees repeated it during long nights in the sim rooms. A few taped it above their bunks. Callie never commented. She just kept working. The simulator logs she used were still stored in the corner locker, the ones she had hand-coded and cross-annotated for 3 years before anyone knew what she was doing. In the margins of those pages, near the torque calibration notes and rotor stress diagrams, 2 sets of initials were scribbled. C plus B. No one asked what they meant. But some of the new techs handled those pages like they were artifacts. On the ground, not much else changed. Callie still kept her cot clean, her gear packed. She still reviewed mission maps over coffee while others scanned their phones. She still ran drills with flight crews who had seen less than half the hours she had logged alone in the dark. But now, when she walked into a briefing, people made space. They didn't step aside as a formality. They did it because they wanted to hear her speak. Once a year, on the same week without fail, she submitted a flight request with no designation, no mission number, no assigned personnel. The sheet listed a single pilot, 1 aircraft, 1 hour, and a flight plan marked by a series of coordinates that traced an arc over the mountain ridge. The crew chiefs all knew what it meant. She flew the route alone. No one joined. No one asked to ride along. She would lift off just before sunset in her assigned bird, take the corridor her brother had once flown, and climb until the sun turned the edges of the world to amber. She never broke calm silence. She never deviated from the path. One technician said he saw her silhouette in the clouds one year, just before final light, banking wide over the western peaks. He swore the angle looked exactly like the flight photo of Ben that used to hang in the old hallway before the walls were repainted. Another junior officer stood on the line and watched the pattern from the ground, murmuring to no one in particular. They used to call her backup. Now we call her the one who was ready when it counted. Callie never replied to those kinds of remarks. She folded her gloves back through her belt and logged her own landings. She updated the training database herself, entered scores for new pilots, and left comments only where necessary. She didn't teach by speech. She taught by repetition. She never asked for legacy, but she built one anyway. Ben's old map was still folded in her footlocker. The pencil lines softened from age. The initials in the corner faded but legible. She didn't frame it. She didn't need to. The map lived in every turn she taught her students to fly. Every risk she showed them how to avoid. Every margin she trained them to calculate without thinking. Some legacies are loud. Hers was not, but it would last. Some people train for the spotlight. Others train for the moment someone's life will depend on them. Callie never needed applause to know her worth. She prepared in silence, stayed ready when no one was watching, and answered a call that wasn't supposed to be hers. In doing so, she redefined what it means to lead not through orders, but through presence. Her legacy was not carved in medals or headlines, but in every trainee who now shows up early, checks twice, and flies like someone's life is already in their hands. If you have ever been overlooked despite your preparation, if you've waited quietly while others were chosen first, then Callie's story is for you. You are not backup. You are next in line. And when your moment comes, you will be ready. Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories of quiet strength and unexpected courage.